Well, welcome to the Mindful Cranks, where using your mind is not necessarily a bad thing, and where being cranky can actually be mindful. Let's crank it up.
In this episode, I spoke with Michal Pagis, who is an associate professor of sociology at Bar Ilan University, Israel, about her new book, Inward, Vipassana Meditation and the Embodiment of the Self, published by the University of Chicago Press. Using a micro-sociological analysis through participant observation and auto-ethnography, Michal studied Western Vipassana practitioners of SN Goenka silent meditation retreats. We explored a range of questions and topics, especially her observations of the socialization process of these practitioners into modes of what she calls collective solitude, as well as the tensions, conflicts, and complexities these practitioners faced with such a secularized practice. It was a lively and deeply engaging conversation that I think you will enjoy. Well, I'm very happy and pleased to welcome Michal Pagis to the podcast, all the way from Tel Aviv. Is that right?
It is.
Yeah, and she just published a really interesting sociological book called Inward, Vipassana Meditation and the Embodiment of the Self, published by the University of Chicago Press. And it's a really in-depth observation, which we'll talk about today. So thank you again. I see your book as kind of this micro-sociological analysis of, correct me if I'm wrong, the Goenka 10-day silent meditation Vipassana retreats?
Yeah, it is.
Is that?
Yeah, I took a micro-sociological perspective, which is rare usually in the study of meditation. Even sociological studies of meditation usually take a more macro level perspective. And I conducted an in-depth ethnography that also included auto-ethnographic parts of Vipassana meditation as taught by SN Goenka, which is a specific Vipassana group. It's a global Vipassana group, so they have centers around the world. And I visited and conducted participant observation in the center near Chicago in Illinois, and in the center in Israel, where I live, and also for a shorter time in the center in Massachusetts that belonged to that group. Yeah.
Oh, very interesting. I'm from Chicago, so I know I kind of know the campus of the University of Chicago a little bit. I used to teach at Loyola downtown campus. Cool. Yeah, and it seems like your book really examines this socialization process that occurred in these retreats and after these retreats in terms of what you call modes of collective solitude. And what I found really fascinating was this insider kind of, as you say, participant observer, auto-ethnographic description of these retreats, which I don't know if anyone's ever done that. I remember coming across a couple of your journal articles in the past, and some early maybe publications that you had. And it was really great that you were able to put this into a book. And you also looked at not just the Vipassana practitioners, but also interviewed some of their extended relations, such as their significant others and their spouses and friends and family members. And let me see if I get this into a perspective a bit. But is your central aim, or was your central aim in And your central claim or your empirical findings is that Vipassana practice is not asocial, but it's a socially embedded practice. A very unique social environment. Is that right?
Yeah,
About right?
I think that's right. In many ways, I was going against the stream, finding that many studies of meditation practice look at meditation as a very individual practice. As you probably know, there are a lot of psychological and neuroscientific studies on meditation that kind of assume that this is something that happens between a person and himself, right? And they put you in an fMRI, they put all the things and check what's happening to your brain waves, which is an important side. But meditation practice is usually takes place, at least in the stages of beginners, in a group. And even though you might be able to learn meditation from a book or from an app, as people try to do today, many of the people I spoke to said that it's quite difficult to learn meditation seriously without joining some kind of a teacher collective group sitting sessions or meditation retreats. And we also see that these retreats and lessons are very popular, and there is a very high demand going to these spaces. So this is the puzzle in many ways with which I started this study, saying people are talking about meditation as if it is an individualizing practice. Not only in the scientific community that look mainly at the psychology of meditation, but also even the people themselves. I mean, people talked about meditation retreats. They're going to meditation retreats in order to face themselves, to take a break from social life. Meditation is something that happens between me and myself. So it's this wording that captures something in their experience, but at the same time ignore, this view of a meditation hall. Anyone who's ever seen a meditation hall, bodies sitting one next to the other, quite close to one another. You can smell one another. You can hear the breath of your neighbor. You can hear coughs, laughs, crying in a meditation retreat. All of these things are happening, and they're very interesting. And I wanted to understand what kind of social order and what kind of social interaction enable this feeling of solitude while in a group. So this paradoxical space in which, on the one hand, people experience meditation as something very individual, as something that is happening between themselves, me and myself. But on the other hand, they need a group in order to achieve that experience.
Yeah, that's a really important point. I think we definitely will come back to that theme about this self-orientation and this individualistic kind of view. But one of the impressions, now I've never participated in a Goenka 10-day retreat. I've participated in other retreats, various sorts, but one of the impressions I got from reading your account of these retreats appeared to me, at least in print, as being quite austere and even that in some ways, this is just my own interpretation, but meditation appeared as almost like an intersubjective athletic performance, almost like a competition of sorts in terms of the mimicking of endurance, who could sit the longest without moving, who could endure the pain in the legs the best. In fact, You even likened this to a fitness class, like at a gym. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. So I agree that the Goenka retreats are relatively extreme. One of my informants, I remember, referred to them as the boot camp of meditation. And it's an extreme type, but I've been to other retreats and I talked to people in other Vipassana retreats and also Zen retreats. And I think that even though it's on the extreme side, it does represent, in general, lines or the spirit of a retreat. For example, the question of the competition, which I discuss, of mimicking, of thinking, spending time in the mind of others, which means that I sit in meditation and I'm supposed not to move. Or if I move, I'm supposed to move very quietly, right? Or very slowly, because that's a part of the meditation practice in the Goenka tradition. So I'm thinking, what will my neighbor think of me if he hears me moving, right? or what happens if I cough and disturb others? So these are elements, and these are social elements that are not unique to meditation. You can find them also in a concert, right? Or in listening to the opera, right? So there are strict rules, very strict rules, that are relatively extreme, that hold this thing together. But what's important in my analysis is that, on the one hand, when you start meditating, you do spend time in the mind of others and have this competitive urge of, can I not move for 1 hour, or can I sit longer than my neighbor, or when my neighbor moves, then I move, because this is it.
Yeah.
But spending too much time in the mind of others is eventually destructive of meditation. And people realize that. So on the one hand, it's a space that encourages you into some way to be competitive and to spend time in the mind of others. But it also teaches you how to relax that part, to start disconnecting from it, push it to the background. Because if I sit the whole hour saying, just 1 more minute, just 1 more minute, just 1 more minute, then the whole point of meditation is lost. So there is this movement, I call this movement a movement from doing meditation to being done by meditation, a movement from focusing on the effort, on focusing on the social control, on the social judgments, to pushing that to the background and just focusing on your inner sensations. And it's an important part of my analysis, because what I want to say is that meditation is not just about focusing on the inner lining of experience, which is the inner sensations of the body or the breath, all those things that in everyday life we usually do not focus on. It's not just that. It's also about teaching you a new kind of way of being with others. And this new way of being with others means that you have to let go at some level from the judgments or the way of attending to the ways others see you. But in order to do that, you start by attending to the way others see you.
I see. And in these retreats, I don't really know how much instruction is given. I assume that there are some basic instructions that are given. We don't really need to get into the details of that, but is there some sort of implicit message that there is a right way to meditate?
Well, It's a good question. People sometimes wonder about that. Am I doing it right? Right? The question of am I doing it right?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot.
And it comes
right?
up in the book.
Internal dialogue.
Yeah.
The internal dialogue of
Exactly.
questioning our own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I doing it right? Something is wrong here. I give, for example, the story of a woman that she hears in the evening lectures that the teacher talks about pain. That pain, it happens when there is pain, and everyone is painful, and it's normal. And she, during the retreat, did not feel pain at all. She was feeling this euphoric feelings, really wonderful sensation. She was like, something is wrong here. Where is the pain? So she went to the teacher and asked him, what's going on? Maybe I'm doing it wrong. And the answers are usually very basic. They're usually quite the same. They say, just continue and observe whatever comes up. Just continue and observe. So there is the meditation instructions are very, there is a system, because in the Goenka tradition, there is a system of a body scan. So it does give you a structure to the meditation, that you observe the breath and then you go, observing the sensations on the body from top to bottom. And that you should move, try and reduce movement. But otherwise, it's quite open in that sense.
I'd like to bring up the interesting case of Tanya, this woman who had an episode of crying at the retreat that you were on. But at least at first, the meditation teacher didn't approach her, and she left the group retreat, and she continued to cry most of the night, according to her roommate. And then when she did meet with the teacher the next day, she told him she wasn't doing very well and that she couldn't stop crying. And you write that he smiled and told her it was okay to cry, but cry like a Vipassana meditator, to focus on the sensations of her tears, essentially, and not get hooked by the story behind the tears. I get that, but I'm curious, what initially was your own response to this account when you were there?
Well, I write it also in the book that I was surprised. I was expecting a dialogue, that she would tell him her story and he would, respond by reassuring or empathy or whatever it is. And that didn't happen. And in general, the teachers usually try to reduce the dialogue to the minimum. I saw that happening again and again. The dialogues can become longer if the student returns. So it can end up being a longer dialogue, but it was really a surprising moment for me, because it was the question of, from an outsider point of view, it seems like, is that enough for her? Okay, did she need more? Would she be okay with that answer? And then there is also the understanding that there is something very important in that answer that captures the social relations or the social order of the meditation retreat, in which your story is not important, not just to the teacher, but it should not be very important to yourself as well. So from a sociological point of view, we usually say that the way we view ourselves, our interaction with ourselves is a mirror, right, of our interactions with others. There is an internal conversation that is internalized based on our interactions, on our external conversations with others. And this was, a place where I realized that he is producing a conversation that is external, teacher and student, based on the way that he's expecting her to cultivate, a mode that he's expecting her to cultivate internally. Yeah. And sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not successful. Some people, get hooked on that and continue. And in this specific case, when I met her in the last day of the retreat, she looked very happy, very serene, so she had a very good retreat. But some people end up leaving after 2, 3, 4 days, or, finish the meditation retreat and say, wow, this was so difficult. I'm never coming to this place again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I completely understand the teacher's response in terms of the frame that he was setting. But I think this may tie into some of the research that I'm sure you're aware of by Willoughby Britton and others about the adverse effects of meditation for even people who are just dipping their feet in. I mean, not even necessarily, doesn't even have to be a 10-day retreat, but a 10-day retreat is pretty significant amount of time to jump into if you've never done it before. And I'm wondering, what I didn't see in the book was any sort of speculation about the pitfalls of these kinds of retreats in terms of like spiritual bypassing or people that have past history of trauma, then having these sorts of really adverse reactions. And if all the responses is, well, just keep observing, that could be very detrimental to these people.
Yeah, I think a part of the problem of the book, you can say that there is a self-selection of the people that I talk to. So I did not search specifically for people who had negative experiences. I met people, who had negative experiences, but I met more people who did find something in the meditation. Sure. And entered it. But I do speak on some of the pitfalls when I follow these people. So that's also...
Yes, you do.
Right? So...
Yes, that's a really, really good chapter about how it affected their significant others, right?
Yeah, first...
sometimes positive, sometimes negative.
Yeah, first, so it's how it affected the significant others, but also sometimes about how it's affected them. So I have a story, for example, on the chapter on the biography of meditators, in which I speak of someone who was very excited about his experience, his first course, his second course. He came back a totally different person in his own view. That's how we talked about. He continued to meditate, but something happened in the third course or third retreat that was a downfall. It was a real downfall, and he describes it. And he had a breakout of social anxiety after his third course. He doesn't know if it's connected to the third, if it happened because of the course, if it didn't happen because of the course. And he had really, he had many doubts if to continue or not to continue meditating. And in this specific case, he decided to continue meditating. But in order to do that, he had to adopt a very specific narrative. And the narrative was that when bad things happen, come up in meditation, such as his social anxiety, this is really deep in sankharas, deep in a Buddhist sense, so deep in elements that are ingrained in the body from past lives that are coming up to the surface. So he had to adopt a more spiritual, one would say, or more cosmological Buddhist point of view in order to integrate that downfall into his story. And he ended up doing that successfully, I must say. But not everyone is doing that successfully. So people end up living, when these things happen. And this can also happen, I agree, in the first meditation course. I had another story of, for example, of a meditator who took his Vipassana course in India and had very difficult dreams, sexual dreams during the Vipassana course. And when he went to the teacher was very negative about that because of the sexuality that was. So these are also cultural clashes, that can come up, that people don't know what to do with them. And they're there in that sense. There are also negative things happening. I met more of the people who told, ended up telling a narrative of transformation that they were attached to or that they found as positive. But it's a very deep experience in that sense. And people are talking about coming out transformed, but it can be to the positive or to the negative. And that's also why when I compare this structure, not just the experience, but the structure at the end of the book, I compare it to very different social spheres. Some of them are considered positive in our culture, but some of them are considered very deviant. And it could be drugs, for example, different experimentations with drugs. It could be self-cutting. It could be, eating disorders, but it could also be jogging and running and dieting and all these spaces in which the body becomes so central in our experience, and there is a new relation with others, and that can open up a space to positive transformations or to but that can also open up a space to very different, roads.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. And I think you make another interesting point that unlike in religious traditions, let's say in the case of Buddhism or monastic Buddhism especially, there are very strong institutional norms for behavior. And there's also very clear doctrinal frameworks for how to engage in meditative practice. These doctrinal frameworks actually inform meditative practice. In other words, there's a context and a guiding path that meditation is made to be a part of the entire system, the systemic framework. And that in that respect, it's inseparable from the practice itself. Whereas with the occasional Western meditator, in this case, people who select to attend this 10-day retreat, there isn't much community support. There isn't much to go on in terms of experiential guidance or these sorts of religious frameworks to traverse this path of mental development. It seems as if, at least in the West, that the path has become synonymous with meditation. And I wonder if you see that as problematic, or do you see this figure it out on your own approach, just part of the modern way in the West?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that for some people, it certainly introduces a problem. Not for some people, in general. The way that meditation is built into the West, because it's framed as such an individualistic practice, and it's kind of torn from its religious background, but also from the community of monks, of the relation between the monks and the lady. it is very, people can feel isolated in the practice. So they find the ways to create communities. So they go to group sittings with other people, and they return to meditation retreats. And in many ways, the fact that it doesn't have a community is attractive, because these are people who come with a Western, mindset to begin with. They're not looking for a group in which people hug one another. Okay, some people do look for that, but these specific
and they may have negative experiences with their own traditional religious upbringings.
Mm-hmm. Many of them had quite a negative approach to religion. May it be Judaism or Christianity. They looked for something that has no connotation, or at least at first sight, doesn't have a connotation to religion, though they were reassured. They actually told me that they were reassured to hear that the meditation is a part of the Buddhist tradition. So it has a history. The history is attractive. There is something about the Easternization that attracts people, but it's far enough. The Buddhism is far enough. And also, Buddhism is not a religion. Buddhism is a philosophy. That's what usually people are talking about. It's a way of life. We only take, the parts that we're interested in. So the practice of meditation follows the logic of spirituality in the West, one might say, or the therapeutic discourse. And it's attractive, but it creates difficulties. It creates challenges. So one of the challenges, for example, that I talk about is, what do I do with this meditation when I go into daily life? Right? So, okay, I get all these instructions in the meditation retreats. It's very clear what I'm supposed to be doing there. Now I leave the meditation retreats, and I am told that it would be good if I continue and meditate every day. But what do I do with my parents and with my wife, who is not a meditator, or with my friends, who are not meditators? How do I relate to them? There is very little instruction in terms of the everyday relations. And people have to, people have to find their own ways, and they adopt some of the ways from the therapeutic discourse, which I must add that is quite a central frame of mind that people can attach to meditation. And when you read books about meditation, some meditation teachers do it for them, right? Do this connection.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that theme and a little bit more, this whole more therapeutic framing. I definitely want to get into that. But certainly, if we look at, it's an interesting point that they're attracted to it, because even though they may have had really negative or have an aversion to anything that's traditionally religious, they're still attracted at some level to the fact that, as you say, it has a connection to Buddhism. Now, I understand Goenka's part of the whole reformation of Theravada Vipassana as a form of Buddhist modernism. And I mean, this is not, a lot of people have made these claims that it's not a religion, it's a science of mind, it's a universal dharma, it's not Buddhist, these claims are quite contested, as you well know, among religious studies and cultural studies scholars. But putting those claims aside, I think I would like to explore this whole sort of westernization of Vipassana in terms of how it's been reinterpreted through the lens of a therapeutic discourse, as you just said. And I find that creating some problems, as you're noticing in your research. I don't know if you're familiar with, he passed away about a year ago, C.W. Huntington. I actually interviewed him on episode 3, and he wrote an article, I can't remember the exact title, about the triumph of narcissism, Vipassana meditation in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember him making the point that traditional Vipassana has nothing to do with any kind of achievement or accomplishment of the self, and that the therapeutic aims are quite different than the soteriological goal of dispelling all attachment to what is seen as a personal self, whereas psychotherapy is a way to, in a way, try to improve the self or make it at least more functional in the world. So we have these kind of, and it's interesting that some of the quotes of the people that you talk about in the book, and you, as we first started out in the interview, you were saying how when people were attracted to it, it was because of this individualistic motivation, right? But I remember reading, there was a quote, I think I wrote it down here. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, I think it's in chapter 5, which is a really good chapter on intimate social relations. Let's see, by declaring without words that I am not influenced by you or that I am not playing your game, I attempt to strike a new balance. I won't be influenced by you. So the fact that, as I see it, you are not influenced by me is no longer a moral problem of unfairness or inequity on page 108.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I read that, it reminded me of an old Gestalt prayer by Fritz Perls. And his Gestalt prayer sounds almost exactly like that, because I'll read his Gestalt prayer and then you can tell me what you think. I do my thing and you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I, and if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Do you see any difference between those two?
I think there is similarity. That specific quote that you were reading was about anger. So this is a very specific way of negotiating anger in everyday life.
That's interesting, because Fritz Perls was a really angry guy from what I recall.
Maybe that was his way of negotiating anger. I don't know, but he wasn't successful.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I had to say that.
So it was about using meditation as a way to not be influenced by the anger of another person. But I want to go back to how you started. I think that the critique on Vipassana and on mindfulness in general as being too narcissist is a continuation of an earlier critique of cultural studies and of sociologists as well on the therapeutic discourse in general. You know, the triumph of the therapeutic, the understanding therapy as narcissism, as self-indulgent in many ways. I do not share that critique to begin with. Okay, so I think it's too shallow. I think it misses the importance of the therapeutic discourse, what it gives to people, and also the problems it creates. You know, it has two sides. But I think it's important, and that's what I try to do in this book, to understand the point of view of the people and not criticizing it from above by saying, you know, this is pure narcissism. Now, the disconnection that was created between meditation and the religious Buddhist world is certainly a process. And in many ways, Vipassana meditation, as taught in meditation retreats, either in the Goenka tradition or insight meditation, whatever it is, it's a middle. I would call it it's a middle step in the secularization of meditation. So what I was studying is on the way to the teaching of meditation in hospitals and in the gym. But it's not there yet. This is more the mindfulness that you've talked about, right? That the mindfulness that have become so completely secularized that you wondered, is it still Buddhist or not Buddhist? Does it matter if it's Buddhist, as Sharp says? In this middle way, the Dharma is still taught. So people do encounter the Buddha, they do listen, they do hear about it, and they progress in meditation. They read the Satipatthana Sutta. They, if they want, they hear more about the cosmology. And in the chapter where I write about the biography, I have a whole section talking about the people who embraced Vipassana as a way of life, and for them, they speak about detachment, and they speak about not self, and they speak, they adopt the Buddhist ideas and concepts and beliefs. So there is this, continuation in the seriousness, in the depth, and in the level of doctrine that is a part of the practice. So that's is important to say, that it's still there.
Yeah, I think that. No, I agree with that, and so maybe it's more fair to say that in the early stages of a practitioner, not the ones you just described, that there's some sort of conflation going on, perhaps in their own approach, of conflating Vipassana bhavana with psychotherapy or a technique in the service of self-therapy.
Yeah.
Almost like self-medicating in a way.
Yeah, certainly.
Which like aimed at some sort of behavioral or emotional change.
Yeah, certainly. And for the majority of people who encounter meditation for the first time, and also the reasons they give, the motivations they give to go to a meditation retreat, has a lot to do with therapy, with self-change, with becoming a better person, with improving my relations. And all these motivations echo, why people go to a psychologist, right? It's very similar path. Go to a psychologist, or, there are other things to do, or end up, doing yoga, or joining the gym, or all kind of, spaces where you are entering a self-cultivation or self-transformation path, or searching, has a lot to do with self-transformation, self-exploration, and self-improvement. And they hear about it, from other friends who tell them, you have to go to this retreat. It transformed my life. I'm a better person now. Or they hear about it from their psychologist who tell them, maybe you need to try some meditation, in order to manage yourself better. And they read about that in books. And these books might not be specifically about Vipassana meditation, but it doesn't matter. It's, so the books are about mindfulness or about other forms of meditation, but it's packaged. It's packaged through a therapy, self-change, self-exploration framework. But from that point to saying it's narcissistic is a different, is a very different say, because when their motivations is not just about, being with themselves. Their motivations are about managing social relations better. They are also about becoming a better person in the ethical sense. So there is an ethic involved. Anger, for example. Anger was a major theme when talking about how meditation, what meditation does, or how people use meditation in their daily life, managing anger, trying to be more empathic to other people, more compassionate to other people. So we hear, and these are, by the way, also in many ways Buddhist ethics, right? Of social relations, of basic social relations, of how one person should be with another person on one-on-one. So there is this use, certainly there is this use of a technique that was originally used to reach enlightenment in order to maintain everyday life in the modern world. And there is a paradox in it. And I talk about that paradox.
It's interesting because I think what you're describing then is some sort of continuum that may or may not happen depending on the individual, whether they stay within the realm of the therapeutic aims that they're using Vipassana for, and whether they cross the threshold into the more transcendent realm. So I'm wondering, do the teachers in these retreats, do they make this distinction? And if not, do they care, or do they simply expect that students will naturally make such distinctions or transitions from a self-improvement purpose to this transcendent purpose?
I think they hope. I think they hope.
But it's not explicit. There's nothing
Not
explicitly.
in the beginning. Not in the beginning. Because the packaging is therapeutic. But already in the beginning, the teachers tell you, you know, this is not just for healing headaches. Okay, this is not just for dealing with chronic pain. So there is already in these retreats, there are already confronting the mindfulness revolution by already putting these little sentences that say this is a longer path. There is something bigger here. But they also say, you know, at this level, you can decide what you want to take and what you don't want to take. You know, you can decide if you're continuing or not. So there is a mix here that is very interesting. I don't know if you ever saw the movie Doing Vipassana.
No, I've heard about it.
Yeah, so that's, for example, a movie that was it's a Vipassana retreats that took place in the jail as a way to help prisoners, and it's a kind of it's entered the incarnation space, so it's a very different, you know, space where meditation has entered, and the movie is very much structured as a kind of Alcoholics Anonymous kind of story. You know, I've encountered this technique and now it's helping me to become a better person, and so on. And so there is a packaging of this will help you. But once you enter, there are more stuff that you start finding out, and you can decide if you want to go deeper or not. It could be a kind of an conversion. Okay, that you're kind of hiding. You're kind of hiding parts of the story to begin with, and hoping that people will get attracted to meditation. They will find out more of these spaces. And I also, I just want to tell a story from the field that when one of my informats that I talked to and followed for a while started volunteering at the Vipassana Foundation. So he wanted to become more serious, and he felt that Vipassana was helping him. He came to Vipassana after a long divorce, and that was something that was very helpful for him. So he was talking, you know, the self-therapy kind of talk, and he started volunteering and meeting more serious, you know, meditators and teachers. And he told me, you know, he told me, you know, I meet all these people and they don't look happy. And I wonder, am I in the right place? And this is exactly the place, a tipping point that he has to make the decision in many ways. Is meditation about happiness, or is it about, some transcendence? Okay, something different, a different kind of happiness. And he had to make the decision. So people are aware of this, and they see it. It's not just something that I saw there. They have to deal with that, and um, it's a question. It's something that comes up.
Yeah. Well, that is funny. In my experience, it's not that unusual to meet meditators, Western Buddhist teachers who've been meditating 30, 40, even 50 years, and they don't seem to have really changed or transformed in any discernible way. It seems a bit disconcerting to me, but maybe, as your subject said, they feel better inside.
Mm-hmm,
But
mm-hmm.
from the outside, nothing significant has really changed. Now, going into some of your research, when you started interviewing spouses, can you say a little bit more about what you
Yeah.
found from the point of view of significant others?
Yeah, of course. This is something when I teach sociology of the self, this is something that we talk about a lot, of what is self-change and what does it mean when someone feels that he's a changed person, but then all the other people claim that he's exactly the same, right?
Or worse.
Or even worse. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And this was one of the reasons that I said I need to talk to family members, not in order to hear the judgments. Okay, that was not
No, right.
my
Yeah,
point.
right.
I wanted to contrast the self as viewed by self with the self as viewed by others. And a part of it is because the meditators themselves had to deal with that, because they heard their family members sometimes saying, "You haven't changed. You're exactly the same."
Or you're not fun anymore.
Or on the
What
other
happened
hand,
to
exactly, they had to deal
Yeah.
with things like, "What happened to you? You used to be fun. We used to drink together. We used to tell jokes, and now you're not doing that anymore." So, so there is this visions of selfhood, of who I am, that people hold in their mind, but others also hold in their minds about you. And this is also an important sociological insight, that who you are is not just what you feel, it's also the images that people have on you, and the way they view your behavior, and the way they view, your relations. And not only do they judge you or create an image, there are also they have expectations. So they have expectations for a very specific self, and we know that. For example, in the most basic, experience, that when I go back to my mother to be with my mother, I go back to being her, a child, to being the 16-year-old that used to shout at her, right? And it
Yeah.
happens immediately. It's like a switch, And I have these stories, a woman telling me, one of my informants, that she did this meditation retreat and she felt wonderful. And she lost, she got rid of all her anger. And 2 days later, she talks with her mother on the phone, and she starts shouting at her, right? So she switched back to what some meditators even refer to as their old self. Okay, so there is this
Yeah.
old self, new self movement between these relations. And
Yeah, I remember reading another account similar to that, where this woman's husband said, well, for the first few days or so, boy, she was pretty nice, but her temper came back.
Yeah.
After
Exactly.
about a week.
Yeah. So, yeah, and then also the family members wonder, because we have to remember that for family members who are not meditators, and that's also something that is very common in Western modern society, to have someone who holds a specific hobby or religion or spirituality, while his partner in life, his children, his parents do not engage with that. This was not common, 100 years ago. So they have to, the family members have to make some sacrifices. Going to 10 days retreats is a long time. Why don't you come to a vacation instead with me, right? Or sitting for 1 hour meditation in the evening instead of watching TV, Netflix together.
Yeah.
These are sacrifices. These are time-consuming practices, and then they start wondering. Okay, so he's saying that it's good for him. Okay, or she's saying it's good for him, but what am I seeing? And for some family members, there is a feeling of loss of the old self, which is a self that they are attached to. This is a person I was married to. This is a person that that's the way I'm used to having my son. We are seeing others through our relations to them, and their relations haven't changed. I'm still married, I'm still a son, I'm still the same, but I'm trying to negotiate something new in the relation. So sometimes it means, for example, that I'm not engaging in arguments anymore. And meditators see it as a very positive thing, because argument,
not being reactive and
not being
taking the bait,
reactive,
so to speak.
but
Right.
arguments are a way of being socially engaged with someone. And being indifferent can be insulting, right? So it's
Well, that brings up an interesting point about indifference, and I'm
mhm.
wondering too that there could be cases where I think it's even been reported that sometimes after long retreats or more experienced meditators, they have a flattening of affect, or they can even become dissociated from social relations. So, in a way, when you said that family members have suffer from a loss of the old self in the partner, I'm wondering if the meditator is forming a new identity. Now I am a meditator, and it's created kind of a new sense of self.
At some level, yes, but not. It's not very strong. A part of it is because for a strong sense of self, of I am a meditator, I need a community, and I need people around me that acknowledge, the how positive this, the that give you some kind of positive social status for being or
Oh,
for being a
yeah. Well,
meditator. And
and in this case, that's not happening that much, is what you're
yeah,
saying.
it's not happening that much. First, people are not going around telling others that they are meditators. It's more of a private, it's still kept in the private personal zone. And even though meditation has become more mainstream, I did not encounter it as a source of pride. Now, this could be changing. And it could be that today people might see it more as a source of pride, but I still see it as just as going to a psychologist. Going to a psychologist is much more mainstream, but it's not a source of pride.
You don't go around telling everybody you're
Yeah,
seeing a therapist.
exactly.
But there does seem to be, and I think you even say this in the book, that there is this sort of subtle ideology of independence and
Yeah.
autonomy that these practitioners engage in some way.
Yeah. So what I did see is a construction of self that is self-contained. So I am less dependent on others. I can be on my own for a stretch of time. I can deal on my own with my emotional, ups and downs. Um, and I, in some ways, one may say, I don't need others in some ways. And in many ways, the people who were attracted to meditation had some kind of disappointment from social relations to begin with. So people who either were alone and were looking for a way to maintain their self on their own. And it's not surprising that survey shows that people who live alone are a meditator. There is a bigger percentage of meditators who live alone, and it doesn't actually, we don't know the causal effect. It could be that meditation ends up influencing you to live alone. But I would say there is also the opposite causal effect, that people who live alone look for a technique or a way of maintaining that loneliness. Okay.
Well, that's really interesting.
And
you also observe that had an effect differently on different people on their sexual desire.
Yeah, that's also true. That some people felt that, at least in the beginning, in the initial stages, that it increases sexual desire because you become very aware of your sensations, but it's in a more cultivated way, right? So you can focus on your sexual senses instead of being engaged with, what does the other person see and how is he judging my body and so on, which are all these self-images that can be destructive to sexual pleasure. But as time go on, especially more serious meditators, they report the sexual desire is reduced. So there is some kind of reduction, as you say, flattening out. This is flattening of the ups and downs include also a more lower need in sexual relations, and that could be problematic in relationships, right?
So that goes back to living alone.
Yeah.
It reminds me too of was it Robert Bella who wrote? No, maybe some Robert Putnam who wrote the book Bowling Alone.
Bowling Alone, yeah. The Bowling Alone
Yeah.
book, yeah. And it's true. It's the percentage. There is also a wonderful book that is called Living Solo that shows
Living solo.
more and more people are living alone, and also they are preferring. It's a preference. So it's not just that they are are pushed to live alone. Some of them are pushed to live alone because they didn't find a partner and so on. But there is also a preference to living alone. There are couples who are living alone that decide to have two separate apartments, right? So it's a bigger percentage of people, and they have to somehow negotiate this aloneness. Okay, I'm not saying loneliness because it's different, aloneness and loneliness. And I show in the book that for some people, meditation is a tool in doing that, in being alone. And so not being dependent on others is viewed as a good thing, okay, from their perspective. Now, from the perspective of partners and or family members or best friends, the fact that you're no longer dependent on me is not necessarily a good thing, because usually these relationships hold, a mutual dependency. So now you are not dependent on me, but I'm still dependent on you. What am I supposed to do? It's disquieting. It's challenges the balance in the relationship. It's not an easy thing to negotiate. And I do have to say that in the Goenka tradition, or in the teaching, they do refer to this, not a lot, but they do refer to this by saying that if your partner does not meditate, you shouldn't go too far on the path. So there is really a recommendation, because this is a group in which all the teachers are not monks, and many of them are married. So this is what's called a household tradition. And they acknowledge that it can create problems. So if your partner, and they specifically talk about the partner, they don't talk about the parents, they talk, but if your partner is not, we don't want you to divorce your partner, we don't want you to leave him behind, be careful with the progression, because at a certain point, it will create difficulties. So there is this acknowledgement of this disjunctions between meditation and family life. But this also shows us that there is a limit to the secularization of meditation. There is a limit to the therapy-oriented point of view of meditation, because meditation does carry the logic of the monastic Buddhism. And it's not, and this goes back, why is it important that mindfulness is Buddhist? It is important because practices are not just invented out of the blue. They're invented from a world of values and a world of social relations, and they carry these values and they carry these social relations, even when these values and social relations are not explicit. And this is what I show in the book, that we have to take that into account. And I think some of the more recent meditation teachers have moved on to try to make it more explicit, or try to integrate different communication skills or teach communication skills in meditation retreats, which was not done before. But this is a very new thing, and we still have to see if it works, because meditation is not about communication. This is not what it's about.
Yeah, you use a phrase somewhere in the book that some of the meditators that you interviewed viewed it as a form of self-maintenance. I think that was the term you used. And you write that one meditator explained that he was attracted to Vipassana because, quote, "it is something that is mine. I mean, apart from meditation instructions, whatever follows is mine." And you go on to elaborate that, quote, "Vipassana then is something one experiences alone in the privacy of one's own body and mind." And I'm wondering how you see that against sort of the the aim of it seems like there's a sense of ownership that is attached to the experience of meditation. Is that what that quote was about? I'm just trying to parse that quote and trying to make sense of it.
Yeah. Well, in the book, I use this quote as something that exposes a puzzle, because it's something that is my own, he's saying. And I said, well, it's not. Look, you're learning it in a group. It has a history. It has a biography.
Yeah,
it's all about social relations. So how can you say it's yours, right?
Well, even if it is within a group, it seems like that there's this sense of grasping or ownership of that experience, and as sort of holding on to as part of my identity. This is mine. It's something that is the privacy of one's own body and mind. I found that troubling in a way, as sort of almost counter to Vipassana as being a purification, a purging of self-interest.
Yeah. It's there are paradoxes that are part of this story of finding something that is so intimate I would say. When he's saying that it's mine, I don't know if I would refer to it as ownership. I would say that it's intimate, that it's something that I feel very close to, in a way that is becoming a part of me, or has become a part of me, and I'm pouring into it, the thing. I think that would be the perspective, and I'm pouring into it. I'm through it. I'm learning about myself. Now, to learn about myself, one can use it to very different directions. You can learn about yourself in order to, just because it's a self-interest. I'm interested in myself. I can learn about myself because I want to become a better person, and self-knowledge is important. This is kind of the therapeutic, point of view. You go to a psychologist not because just to learn about yourself. You go to a psychologist in order to learn about yourself in order to improve your relations. Okay, whether or not it works, that's a different story. But that's the frame. But certainly the question of becoming attached to meditation or becoming dependent on meditation can come up. And it's a puzzle that is, or let's say it's something that I think all meditators, not just in the Vipassanas, and then maybe also all monks, all monks have to deal with, right? Of how do
there's tremendous amount written about this in the tradition. Exactly. This is a problem. This is an obstacle.
It's an obstacle, and it's an obstacle that teachers talk about. You need to let go of your expectations from meditation, and the people I interviews know that, especially if they go to longer courses, so they become more serious meditators. So for example, someone tell me, I know I'm not supposed to have expectations from this 20-day course I'm going to, because I know I'm not supposed to be attached to whatever is coming up, and I should only be observed to it because it's, purification of my attachment. But I have all these expectations that I'll come out, more effective. I'm going to finish my book. I'm going to have this clear mind. And it's, this is something that I think also all meditators and also monks have to deal with, and teachers do confront it. But because of
it could be the trap of not necessarily meditating, but meditating within the idea of meditation.
The idea, or the idea. It could be the idea of meditation, but it could also be the meditating while waiting for it to work. Okay, and
waiting for something. Mm-hmm. Waiting for something special to happen.
Or just the use of the word work. Okay, that meditation works. Meditation works, right? It works. Yeah. So it's not supposed to work, right?
This is a question that I think everyone needs to ask. And it's not, as you say, I think all meditators struggle with these obstacles. But I'm wondering, from what you observed, and a major theme in any meditator's life is how to make so-called progress once the initial euphoria has worn off. So what did you notice or see in terms of how your subjects made sense of progress, the notion of progress in meditation?
So in the chapter that I talk about the biographies, I'm trying to map the different ways that my informants understood meditation, and one of the frames is a frame of progress. Okay, it's not the only one, but one of the frame is that I'm progressing towards something that is better, and this is a frame that is very difficult to maintain. Okay, it has expectations, but it's a very difficult narrative to maintain, because what kind of progress am I looking for? So in the beginning, people who are more amateurs are looking for self-improvement, that it works. It works in my life. It helps me with my stress. It helps me with my relations. It helps me with my work. And when it stops working, they drop, because there is nothing else to keep this going. There is no other social frame. There is no commitment to the practice. There is no religious commitment. So as long as it works, I'm doing it. The moment it stops working for me, I'm not into it anymore. Um, and so this is one way of looking at progress. Then there is a frame that is not about progress, it's more about the ups and downs. Okay, there is something that I'm becoming more committed to the practice, and the commitment has to do with the feelings I had in the beginning, of the feeling of self-transformation, that thing that I found, the encounter with this, with this embodied transcendence, the feeling of peacefulness and so on and so on. And I remember these feelings, and and this keeps me going. This keeps some level of commitment. But if for a long time I'm not encountering this feeling anymore, I'm just, feeling um, negative sensations, and it's not, no peacefulness at all, and so on. Again, you might drop. So it's this, kind of oscillating and seeing how much do I need in order to be committed. And then there is a tipping point that we talked about earlier, in which I make a commitment to this technique because I believe that it's a path. And the path, meditation as a way of life, as a path, is a Buddhist path, in the sense that I am working towards purification of the self, and I might not reach enlightenment in this life, but I might reach enlightenment in the next life. So there is a sense of, migration, that there is a continuation beyond the specific life. And I'm committed to this because I believe. Okay, so beliefs enters the story.
It
And the
seems then
progress.
that tipping. Yeah, go ahead.
And the progress is no longer a progress of, I'm a better person. It's a progress of, the longer I meditate, I go to longer meditation retreats, I experience deeper experiences. I connect these experiences to the Buddhist teachings, and I become a very committed to this sphere. And by the way, at this point, the commitment is also a social commitment. So people move to live next to other meditators or close to the meditation center, or, want to volunteer more in the meditation center, or some of them become meditation teachers. So this follows, a very different understanding of progress than the initial one.
Yeah, it sounds like then that tipping point that you just described, this leap, I think you may have used that word, is an article of faith.
Mm-hmm.
At
It
that
is.
point.
It is. Yeah.
And what's interesting too, I think this is a real struggle that everyone struggles with in some ways, is this. It seems like the conceptual mind is always lurking in the background, even when we're focusing on sensations or observing the flow of sensations. That there's a very subtle sort of constant commentary or reporting back, making judgments. Are we making progress? Is it working? But there's this sense of waiting for what? We don't, is it equanimity or some peak experience? What I remembered from the first time with beginner's mind, when we were just kind of had this unusual sort of sense of detachment or spaciousness. It seems like many meditators, as you describe, are motivated to return to try to recharge their batteries or to try to recreate those early peak experiences. And it seems like there's a lot of waiting, and certainly. But what is the end game?
I'm not sure there is an end game in that sense. I think that um, there is a desire to integrate this into daily life, because there is something that they encountered, usually during the first retreat, that was transformative or enlightening, or a feeling of awakening, one might even say, right?
Beginner's mind. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, and there is this hope that one can maintain, not the full thing, but some kind of a spark, and during daily life, and then a lot of times it changes. So the end game, if there is an end game, it's in continual change. Okay. And it's not surprising. This is how we live, right? We need a motivation now, but the motivations change all the time, or commitments change all the time. So there is this sense of I'm doing it partly, some people, by the way, because I don't want to go back to how it was before. So, for example, if I was suffering from depression, I did a meditation course, and now I'm not suffering from depression anymore, then there is this fear, of if I stop meditating, maybe, the depression will come again. So there is a maintenance. So maybe that would be the maintenance of a specific self that was found. And it doesn't always have to do with progress. It can actually be with keeping some kind of level that I'm satisfied with, or that I'm creating a causal connection to meditation. Of course, we don't know. Maybe you can stop meditating and everything would be fine. We don't know, but I'm creating this causal connection. And I agree with you also that this conceptual understanding lurk in the background, but they're not only lurking. There are, in many ways, essential. They're essential for the Buddhist monk who has the prestige and the status of being a monk and being someone who's like progressing towards enlightenment and maybe becoming a Buddha. And they're essential for maintaining a practice that in the Western world that does not have a socially, a lot of social gratification out of it, or, a social frame that holds it for you. So you do need some kind of explanations to give, both to yourself and to others, why you are meditating. And without this, I don't know if you can continue the practice, again, unless you're already in the after the tipping point, and then you are, why are you meditating? Because I meditate, because this is a path, because I believe. Okay, but that's more complicated, and it takes time to get there. So that's also, we have to go back to the structure of in many ways of the modern Western world, in which the things we do need to be justified to ourselves and to others. Tradition no longer is not enough to say because it's tradition. It's not enough to say because I believe so. You need to explain why you're meditating.
Well, that's really a good place, perhaps, to come to a close. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, what's next for you? What sort of projects or other kind of research are you working on now?
So I continued after I completed the meditation project. I continued to spread out to other self-transformation spheres. So I had a project on life coaching, which could be seen as the opposite of meditation in many ways. But a part of I remember that the way I got into life coaching was through meditators who were also life coaches. And that was so paradoxical to me when I met that, because this is so end-oriented and goal-oriented and rational, and the meditation is so supposed to be present-oriented and emotional. So it was, this is how I got into exploring life coaching. And from there, I have a project now on life coaching and popular psychology in the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, which is also a puzzle, a very interesting puzzle, because in the ultra-Orthodox community in Israel, which is one of the most Orthodox Jewish communities, it's the most Orthodox Jewish communities in the world, we see a very interesting phenomena of people being attracted to life coaching, NLP, CBT, emotional advising, all these practices, all these technologies that are, are psychological, but are not fully a part of the formal psychology. They are partly academic, partly magical in some level, partly mystical. Meditation, not so much, by the way, because of the Buddhist connotations. But all the others, spaces that surround it, and it's flourishing. It's flourishing. You see it in newspapers, you see workshops. Women are going in the evening to hear, lectures. So it's very interesting. This is, an ethnographic project I'm in the middle of.
So is that more popular than modern mindfulness then in Israel? Is that
for the ultra-Orthodox community, certainly, but the ultra-Orthodox community is a small community. It's about 10% of the population in Israel. So for them, yeah. But in general, popular psychology, all these spheres of popular psychology, all the way to the New Age therapy.
Sure.
Is very popular in Israel. The same, I think, as in California. It's this is very
so.
Yeah.
Well, Michal, this was a great conversation. I'm really glad we were able to really dive in to really kind of dig into this, and I enjoyed it really quite a bit. So thanks for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was fun and very mind stimulating. And I hope that people are going to enjoy the book.
Yes, they should buy the book. Inward. Vipassana Meditation and the Embodiment of the Self. Thank you.
Thank you.